Say hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
All right, sit down, Dylan. Sit down.
Yes, saying this. Hi.
Okay, move so I can get right, please. Thank you. Scoot over a little bit, unless you want me to sit on your lap. No, I know you don't, right?
No.
Okay, so what are we going to read today? We're going to read
Narnia.
The Chronicles of Narnia. It's The Lion, the Witch, and the Roadworm, Chapter 11. Aslan is nearer, okay? Now Edmund, meanwhile, had been having a most disappointing time. When the dwarf had gone to get the sledge ready, he expected that the witch would start being nice to him, right? That was why he went over there, right? As she had been at their last meeting, but she said nothing at all. And when at last Edmund plucked up his courage to say, "Please, your majesty, could I have some Turkish delight? You said," she answered, "Silence, fool." And then she appeared to change her mind and said, as if to herself, "And yet it will not do to have the brat fainting on the way," and once more clapped her hands, and another dwarf appeared. "Bring the human creature food and drink," she said. The dwarf went away and presently returned bringing an iron bowl with some water in it and an iron plate with a hunk of dry bread on it. He grinned in a repulsive manner as he set them down on the floor beside Edmund and said, "Turkish delight for the little prince. Ha, ha, ha." How many people here like to eat dry bread?
Is that like stale bread?
It's like stale bread, yeah.
What is stale?
Not too much, yeah, right?
That's done.
"Take it away," said Edmund sulkily. "I don't want dry bread." But the witch suddenly turned to him with such a terrible expression on her face that he apologized and began to nibble at the bread, though it was so stale he could hardly get it down. "You may be glad enough of it before you taste bread again," said the witch. While he was still chewing away, the first dwarf came back and announced that the sledge was ready. The white witch rose and went out, ordering Edmund to go with her. The snow was again falling as they came into the courtyard, but she took no notice of that and made Edmund sit beside her on the sledge. But before they drove off, she called Mogrim, and he came bounding like an enormous dog to the side of the sledge. So Mogrim was the big wolf, right? Mogrim was a big old wolf. "Take with you the swiftest of your wolves and go at once to the house of the beavers," said the witch, "and kill whatever you find there. If they are already gone, then make all speed to the stone table, but do not be seen. Wait for me there in hiding. I meanwhile must go many miles to the west before I can find a place where I can drive across the river. You may overtake these humans before they reach the stone table. You will know what to do if you find them." What are they supposed to do to you? Harm them. Yeah, I think so. Kill them. "I hear and obey, O queen," growled the wolf, and immediately he shot away into the snow and darkness as quickly as a horse can gallop. In a few minutes he had called another wolf and was with him down on the dam sniffing at the beaver's house. But of course they found it empty. It would have been a dreadful thing for the beavers and the children if the night had remained fine, for the wolves would have been able to follow their trail, and 10 to 1 would have overtaken them before they had got to the cave. But now that the snow had begun, again the scent was cold, and even the footprints were all covered up. That's cool. Meanwhile, the dwarf whipped up the reindeer, and the witch and Edmund drove out under the archway and on and away into the darkness and the cold. This was a terrible journey for Edmund, who had no coat. Before they had been going a quarter of an hour, all the front of him was covered with snow. He soon stopped trying to shake it off, because as quickly as he did that, a new lot gathered. And he was so tired. Soon he was wet to the skin, and oh, how miserable he was. It didn't look now as if the witch intended to make him a king. All the things he had said to make himself believe that she was good and kind and that her side was really the right side sounded to him silly. He would have given anything to meet the others at this moment, even Peter. The only way to come... No, thank you. Okay? Okay? You can say okay. Can you say okay?
Savannah.
Savannah, can you say okay? Thank you. I appreciate it. That's very good. He would have given anything to meet the others at this moment, even Peter. The only way to comfort himself now was to try to believe that the whole thing was a dream and that he might wake up any moment. And as they went on, hour after hour, it did not seem like a dream. Do you think he was happy or sad?
Sad.
How sad was he?
Like just sad.
Like a lot of sad, right? Probably. This lasted longer than I could describe even if I wrote pages and pages about it, but I will skip on to the time when the snow had stopped and the morning had come and they were racing along in the daylight. And still they went on, and no sound but the everlasting swish of the snow and the creaking of the reindeer's harness. And then at last the witch said, what have we here? Stop. And they did. What do you think they have? Uh-oh. And every time she wants to stop, that's going to be a bad deal, doesn't it?
That box.
Let's see, what a second. Now, Edmund hoped she was going to say something about breakfast, but she had stopped for quite a different reason. A little way off, at the foot of a tree, sat a merry party. A squirrel and his wife and their children, and 2 satyrs and a dwarf and an old dog fox. All on stools around a table. Edmund couldn't quite see what they were eating, but it smelled lovely, and there seemed to be decorations of holly, and he wasn't at all sure that he hadn't seen something like a plum pudding. At the moment when the sledge stopped, the fox, who was obviously the oldest person present, had just risen to his feet, holding a glass in his right paw, as if he was going to say something. But when the whole party saw the sledge stopping and who was in it, all the gaiety went out of their faces. The father squirrel stopped eating and with his fork halfway to his mouth, and one of the satyrs stopped with his fork actually in his mouth, and the baby squirrel squeaked with terror. "What is the meaning of this?" asked the witch queen. Nobody answered. "Speak, vermin," she said, "or do you want my dwarf friend to find you a tongue with his whip? What is the meaning of all this gluttony, this waste, this self-indulgence? Where did you get all these things?" "Please, your majesty," said the fox, "we were given them, and if I might make so bold as to drink to your majesty's very good health." "Who gave them to you?" said the witch. "Father Christmas," stammered the fox. "What?" roared the witch, springing from the sled and taking a few strides nearer to the terrified animals. "He has not been here. He cannot have been. How dare you? But no, say you have been lying, and you will even now be forgiven." At that moment, one of the young squirrels lost his head completely. He has, it squeaked, beating his little spoon on the table. You think that was a smart thing to do? Maybe not. Sounds pretty scary, huh? Edmund saw the white witch bite her lips so that a drop of blood appeared on her white cheek, and then she raised her wand. Oh, don't, please," shouted Edmund. But even while he was shouting, she had waved her wand, and instantly there was a merry party. Where the merry party had been, there were only statues of creatures, one with a stone fork fixed forever halfway in his mouth. So how would you like it if you were living your life and you had a fork in your mouth and somebody turned you into stone right there, and you were stuck for the rest of all time with a fork in your mouth?
Except for if they came around or when
How would you like it? How would you like it?
Aslan could do that.
Yeah.
Aslan could heal.
I'd rather be stuck drinking coffee.
You'd rather be stuck with a cup in your mouth?
No, but
That'd be yummy. Yep. Okay, as for you, said the witch, giving Edmund a stunning blow on the face as she remounted the sledge, "let that teach you to ask favor for spies and traitors. Drive on." And Edmund, for the first time in this story, felt sorry for somebody besides himself. It seemed so pitiful to think that those little stone figures sitting there all the silent days and all the dark nights, year after year, till the moss grew on them, and at last even their faces crumbled away. It'd be sad, wouldn't it?
except Aslan could heal that kind of thing.
You're right about that, because you have watched the movie. But you didn't. If you hadn't watched the movie and you were only reading the book, what would you think? You don't know. You'd wonder, wouldn't you?
Get less details.
Yes. Now they were steadily racing on again, and soon Edmund noticed that the snow which splashed against them as they rushed through it was much wetter than it had been all last night. And at the same time, he noticed that he was feeling much less cold. It was also becoming foggy. In fact, every minute it grew foggier and warmer, and the sledge was not running nearly as well as it had been running up till now. And at first he thought this was because the reindeer were tired, but soon he saw that couldn't be the real reason. The sledge jerked and skidded and kept on jolting as if it was stuck against the stones. And however the dwarf whipped the poor reindeer, the sledge went slower and slower. There also seemed to be a curious noise all around them, but the noise of the driving and jolting and the dwarf shouting and the reindeer prevented Edmund from bearing what it was. until suddenly the sledge stuck so fast that it wouldn't go on at all. When that happened, there was a moment's silence, and in that silence, Edmund could at last listen to what the other noise properly, a strange, sweet, rustling, chattering noise, and yet not so strange, for he'd heard it before, if only he could remember where. Then all at once he did remember. It was the noise of running water. That's pretty cool. And then all at once he did remember. All around them, throughout, and though out of sight, there were streams, chattering, murmuring, bubbling, splashing, and even in the distance roaring, and his heart gave a great leap, though he hardly knew why, when he realized that the frost was over, and much nearer there was the drip, drip, drip from the branches of all the trees. And then as he looked from one tree, he saw a great load of snow slide off it, and for the first time since he had entered Narnia, he saw a dark green of a fir tree. But he hadn't time to listen or watch any longer, for the witch said, "Don't sit staring, fool, get out and help." And so what was going on? You guys know from watching the show.
The witch asked Edmund to
What happened? Do you think that the snow was, the winter
melted.
had broken? And that it
Yeah.
was all, the snow was melting? And what's going to happen to the sledge next?
It's probably gonna break.
It's not going to go, is it? Because sledges have to have what? Snow. If all the snow melts, what happens?
No sledges.
And of course, Edmund had to obey. He stepped out onto the snow, but it was really only slush by now, and began helping the dwarf get the sledge out of the muddy hole it had got into. And they got in and out in the end, and by being very cruel to the reindeer, the dwarf managed to get it on the move again. And they drove a little further, and now the snow was really melting in earnest, and patches of green grass were beginning to appear in every direction. Until you have looked at the world of snow as long as Edmund had been looking at it, you will hardly be able to imagine what a relief those green patches were after the endless white. Then the sledge stopped again. "It's no good, your majesty," said the dwarf. "We can't sledge in this thaw." "Then we must walk," said the witch. "We shall never overtake them walking," growled the dwarf, "not with the start they've got." "Are you my counselor or my slave?" said the witch. "Do as you're told. Tie the hands of the human creature behind it and keep hold of the end of the rope. And take your whip and cut the harness off the reindeer. They'll find their own way home." The dwarf obeyed, and in a few moments Edmund found himself being forced to walk as fast as he could with his hands tied behind him. How would you like to walk with your hands tied behind you?
I wouldn't.
That wouldn't be fun at all, would it?
No, you have to go like this.
Okay. He kept on slipping in the slush and mud and the wet grass, and every time he slipped, the dwarf gave him a curse and sometimes a flick with his whip. The witch walked behind the dwarf, kept on saying, "Faster, faster." Every moment the patches of green grew bigger and the patches of snow grew smaller. Every moment more and more and more of the trees shook off their robes of snow. Soon wherever you looked, instead of great white shapes, you saw the green of firs and the black prickly branches of bare oaks and beeches and elms. And then the mist turned from white to gold and presently cleared away together. Shafts of delicious sunlight. Do you guys ever taste sunlight?
Hey, that's
Is
just
it delicious?
No, that's just a saying.
It's a saying. It's a way of saying it, isn't it?
It's
Can you
not.
imagine sunlight that was so good it tasted delicious? Get your imagination out. Who has an imagination around here? Can you imagine sunlight that tastes delicious?
Really?
Like what? Like chocolate ice cream, or like
Vanilla?
tea?
I like pistachio ice cream. It's like yum.
Yeah, yummy, yummy, yummy. I agree with you. All right, so they were imagining what?
That.
Shafts of sunlight that tasted delicious. Soon, there were more wonderful things happening. Coming suddenly around the corner into a glade of silver birch trees, Edmund saw the ground covered in all directions with little yellow flowers. Celandines. The noise and water grew louder. Presently, they actually crossed a stream. Beyond it, they found snowdrops growing. "Mind your own business," said the dwarf when he saw that Edmund had turned his head to look at them, and he gave the rope a vicious jerk. But of course, this didn't prevent Edmund from seeing. Only 5 minutes later, he noticed a dozen crocuses growing around the foot of an old tree, gold and purple and white. Then came a sound even more delicious than the sound of water. Close beside the path they were following, a bird suddenly chirped from the branch of a tree. It was answered by the chuckle of another bird a little further off, and then, as if they had had been a signal. There was a chattering and chirruping in every direction, and then a moment of full song. And within 5 minutes, the whole wood was ringing with bird music. And wherever Edmund's eyes turned, he saw the birds alighting on branches, or sailing overhead, or chasing one another, or having their little quarrels, or tidying up their feathers with their beaks. Do birds ever tidy their feathers?
Yes.
Yeah, they tidy their feathers. Faster, faster, said the witch. There was no trace of the fog now. The sky became bluer and bluer, and now there were white clouds hurrying across it from time to time. In the wide glades there were primroses. A light breeze sprang up, which... You gotta not do that, you're distracting me, girl. A light breeze sprang up and scattered drops of moisture from the spraying branches and carried cool, delicious scents against the faces of the travelers. The trees began to come fully alive. The larches and the birches were covered with green, laburnums with gold, and soon the beech trees had put forth their delicate, transparent leaves. The travelers walked under them in the light that also became green. A bee buzzed across the path. You know, bees are only out in the summer, you know.
Are we done?
Not yet, but almost. I bet you. Let's see.
How many more
Oh,
pages?
look. How much is left?
One.
Like this much on one page.
Oh my.
Oh my, we're almost done. This is no thaw, the dwarf suddenly said, the dwarf suddenly stopping. This is spring. What are we to do? Your winter has been destroyed. I tell you, this is Aslan's doing. If either of you mention that name again, said the witch, he shall instantly be killed.
I know what the next chapter is. I totally do, but I'm not going to spoil it.
There you go. Don't spoil it. You done good. All right. Well, you guys did good. And even you didn't even ask about when the book is over until the last paragraph. Way to go. You got any 5 for me? 5. Hit it. Let me hit it like that. Hit it.
Like this.
Hit it.
After the chapter cover, can we play behind the couch?
Yes, you can. But let me shut off the recording first.
Oh yeah.
Do you know how to do it, Dylan?
Yes.